Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Out of the Pod, the podcast series by The Brief, where we speak to startup founders who dare to dream, build, and grow. And on this show, we get an insight into their challenges, their milestones, and their entrepreneurial journey. In today's episode, I, your host for the show, Sahib Singh, will be diving into discussion about not just an innovative startup with an innovative founder, but a sector or an industry which has perhaps been not heard of or explored much altogether, especially in a country like India. Now, this market or this industry that I'm referring to concerns or revolves around something called data assets. Now, I'm sure the term data assets does give us some window or some room to make our own assumptions about it, especially based on the semantics of the term. But it's better to hear about this term from someone who not only understands this concept in and out, but it's essentially looking forward to be a market pioneer in this space. And that special someone is my guest on today's episode, and his name is Abhishek Bali, who currently heads Zigram as its co founder and CEO since 2018. Today's episode will focus on Abhishek's unique journey and how Zygram came to be, why he chose this space to disrupt it altogether, and more importantly, it'll be about us understanding the importance and potential of the data asset space. On that note, I welcome Abhishek to the podcast. Hey Abhishek, how are you doing today?
Hi, Sahib. I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
Very well. I hope COVID has not been too harsh on you.
Not really. COVID has actually allowed me to, sit at home, spend more time with family, and there were parts of my house that I've not seen, to be very honest, because I was in office most of the time. So COVID has actually been, for me personally, has been all right.
Well, it's all about finding the silver lining, and I'm glad you've done that. So, before we sort of dive into the discussion, I would like to sort of, on the very outset of it, congratulate you. I was recently going through the news and I saw that Zygram has essentially been recognized as one of the top 10 startups in India. So, while I understand it's a great honor to get this sort of a recognition, but what's the vibe around the team like? How have you all taken the news?
Well, we're all quite excited. We're very honored. It's a great list. It's got some very big names in India who are doing a great job in their own space. So in that sense, we are quite happy. The team is fantastic. The team understands and realizes that this is really a collective effort of almost about 100 employees that we have right now, and so they're very happy. They're quite thrilled about the fact that though we are just a 2-year-old startup, we've kind of found our name in that list.
Awesome. And I'm sure it's onwards and upwards from here.
Well, that's the plan, and I'm fairly certain we'll make it happen. But we want to try and take it while we have like a 5-year vision and a 3-year vision to what we want to do. We also realize that what makes all of this happen is the ability to execute on a day-to-day basis.
Of course, goes without saying. Now, getting into the discussion, first of all, I want to understand that Zygram, in its essence, stands as an acronym, right? It's got Zeno, Isaac, Galton, Ramanujan, Augustus, and McCarthy. So, if you were to sort of guide me through as to why you chose these specific personalities to give the name to your venture, and how do you inculcate the qualities or vision of these leaders who inspired this name?
Sure. So when we decided to come up with the name, especially when you're sort of setting up a company, for that couple of weeks when you're just going through the basic foundational steps of setting up an organization, the name becomes very important because it kind of outlines and signifies what you stand for and where is it that you see the company kind of growing, and what are the kind of values you want to base it on. And that is somewhat true for myself and my co-founders and the co-founding team, because it's sort of old-fashioned in that sense where we want to. Our aspiration is to set up not just an organization but an institution. And so we looked at the values of 6 different people whom we felt were representative of our aspirations, really. So, for example, Zeno, who's the founder of the Stoic school of philosophy, if you delve into Stoicism, it is the ability to take things as they come in life, to not get too excited about successes, to not get too blown away by failures, and to look at life in a natural way. And so I find that to be very, very, very powerful when somebody's trying to build an organization. Isaac Asimov, because of just how inventive he was, and a lot of our work is very inventive in nature, and so we needed that ability to be inventive, to tell stories, to have the ability to think beyond what we already know. If you look at Sir Francis Galton, he's possibly the greatest polymaths of our time. So he's worked across, dabbled in different sciences, and a lot of our work is that it's very multidisciplinary. There are also certain other aspects of Sir Francis Galton. So, for example, he was involved in certain in certain areas of science at his time, which were quite controversial. And that kind of also goes on to tell us that there is a moral aspect of science and then there is a practical aspect of science, and one must always make sure that they both kind of go together. Ramanujan is there not so much because of his clear Indian connection, but because he's a self-trained mathematician. And of a lot of our work, we look for people who can, train themselves, learn on their own. They're not dependent on formal institutions of training to be able to get built up. If you look at Augustus was the founder of the Roman Empire, and so we are looking at building institutions, and he had the ability to think of Pax Romana, which led to some 200 years, 300 years of peace in and around that region, which allowed him to create, allowed the Romans to create this massive empire. And finally, John Mccarthy, who is considered the father of AI, but really the reason why he's here is because he was able to sell the idea of artificial intelligence to potential funders in the 60s and 70s, when it was just such a new concept. And so he's here not just because of AI, but because of the ability to sell a concept that is still ill-formed. And I think that's really where all these six individuals come together.
I think that's a brilliant thought. And the three which essentially stand out to me from your answer are Isaac, Augustus, and McCarthy. Isaac, because you talk about being inventive and you do things that are inventive. Augustus, because perhaps you're looking to build an empire of your own in this space. And McCarthy, of course, because I believe AI is a huge part of what you do, right? So if I were to sort of break things down one by one, I'd like to start off by understanding and giving the listeners a chance to understand that when we say data assets, what do data assets actually mean if we were to speak in layman terms? And how important are they in today's day and age? What is their significance?
Sure. So I think we've often heard of the term, data is the new oil, data is an asset. And I think those phrases have been around for many, many years. In fact, the first time I heard, the fact that data is an asset was some 10, 15 years back. But as I dwell deeper into this space with with my current team, which used to work with me a couple of years back, we kind of realized that to clearly identify data and make it an asset, it has to have a couple of features. So those features are that it should be validated, it should be structured, it should be high quality, it should be maintainable. And when you have these features in a database or a data asset or a data list, it truly becomes an asset because then you can use it in a productive manner. If I was to use an analogy, I mean, think about a piece of land in the middle of nowhere. It is absolutely unproductive. Nothing can grow there. Nothing can really happen. But if you put a well there, if you put some building materials there, if you set up a factory there, suddenly that piece of land becomes productive, even in accounting terms, even in terms of in terms of economic outcomes, in terms of social outcomes. Data is a little bit like that. It has to have these features. And I think if I was to use an example, let's use the example of, say, no-fly lists, right? So when you get onto an airplane, your name in places like the US or UK, now even India, is checked against a list of people who are not allowed to fly. And how they do that is you have an airline or you have a ticketing agent or you have an e-commerce company or somebody else who's trying to sell you a ticket. They have a list that is issued by the government, and they need to now make sure that this person does not board a flight, because if they do, then that's against the law and there are fines and penalties and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, what happens is that many of these governments, especially in the US, for example, they just give out a name. So let's say if I take your name, Sahib, and I put Sahib Singh, and I put maybe one more identifier, let's say, or age, there would be hundreds, if not thousands, of such Sahib Singhs. And so what usually happens is in even in the US, a lot of people who are not supposed to be on the no-fly list find it difficulty to fly, right? So, how what a data asset would do is that an organization like ours would take over the responsibility of maintaining, managing, extracting that data, creating more detailed profiles of people, so that when an e-commerce company or a flight company or an insurance company or a ticketing company does provide ticket to the right kind of Sahib Singh, they are able to with confidence allow that person to fly, and it's only the wrong set of people or the people who have been put on the no-fly list by the government who can get stopped. So that really is an example of a data asset working in real life.
Brilliant. So, in its essence, would you say that data asset could be broken down to something which is value additive data?
Yes, I mean, not just value additive, but I what I would say is that it has long-term residual value, right? So there's a lot of data which adds value today, but when you create a data asset, you want that data asset to not just create value today, you want it to the same set of data points to be able to create value over a longer period of time, maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. So that really is a data asset. And even in data, there is two types of data that we are more that we can kind of segregate them. One is the real time data. So if you look at stock prices, tickers. Now that's real time data that you need to use now. But once that time has gone by, the stock price of something 3 days back may not be really that valuable. In fact, it may have no value whatsoever. But if I was to collect that data for 20 years or 30 years, and I was able to aggregate stock movements for metals or for diamonds or for shares, suddenly that analysis and that retrospective analysis, that data asset becomes very, very valuable, right? So the same set of data, but how it is stored, how is it managed, how is it put together, and how is it validated, that differentiates real-time data versus data assets.
Now, if I were to sort of go into more detail as to how data and data assets came to be and how their evolution came to be, we can see that as a building block, data on its own has become more and more crucial in today's businesses, especially when we look at decision making on various levels. Data insights play a very important role, right? And in your career, I believe, which has mirrored the evolution of data so far, what would you say have been the landmark changes which led you to A, set up Zigram, and B, what kind of changes have you noticed which you see can play a bigger part in the future journey of data assets?
Sure. So when I left B school, I started work for Axis Bank. And when I was in Axis Bank, I used to be part of a business called Supply Chain Finance. And there, a lot of decisions were taken on giving credits or loans to a dealer or a distributor or a vendor, effectively people who were part of a supply chain of a larger organization. And when I saw that decision making process, even as a young MBA graduate who kind of went out, kind of got into the business just a few months after passing out, I saw that the credit models that were being applied were fairly old school, right? You had to give your balance sheet, which was already 6 months old or 1 year old, and you had to look at the background of the person, and then you had to effectively make an educated guess to try and figure out, what is the limit that can be given to a dealer or distributor who want very big businesses. Now, when that decision making was happening, considering Indian banking at the time and even today, most bankers are very conservative. So if a person really needs, say, 100 million rupees, they end up only giving 70 million rupees. And the reason why they do that is because they don't have the adequate data in the background to be able to make a decision on whether that 70 million rupees can go up to 80 million rupees or 85 million. So they're really keeping money on the table. Or in certain cases, as we can see with the NPA problem, the non-performing assets problem, there's not enough data to make a good decision, and so you end up, lending out more money. So when I saw that entire process, I realized that in that bank we were pushing out lots of loans, and we didn't have the right data to be able to make that decision, and bankers were very frustrated by it. But we didn't have alternative data that we have right now to be able to make those decisions. After that, I went on to Dun& Bradstreet, which is effectively the oldest data company in the world. It's about from, if I remember, about 180 years old. And Dun & Bradstreet was very proud about the fact that is very proud about the fact that Abraham Lincoln used to be an employee of theirs. So that was like their claim there. So they're a 180-year-old company, and in India, I used to manage some part of the business for them. And what I realized was that we were selling reports on organizations and entities as background checks, so that's financial checks, or and the number of reports that people started buying over the time that I was there kept on increasing. The price per report kept on reducing because people said, "Hey, we're buying in bulk." But paradoxically, very few people were actually reading the report. That really nobody worried about because, hey, we were selling so many reports, it was all fine. But as I thought more and more about it, I asked people why they were doing it. And they said that, listen, we don't have the time to go through these reports. We don't have the time to make sense of all that is printed on a piece of paper. We just quickly need the insights. And that's when you saw, I think, a lot of the insights analytics wave kind of come over into India. That was also the time when I kind of shifted from Dun & Bradstreet, went to BMR Advisors. BMR Advisors was one of the most well-regarded brands in India when it came to professional services, data, AML, so on and so forth. And I joined the risk team, which did data and AML work. And that's when I realized that the reason why people were not buying so many reports was because decisions were quickly being taken over by machines. So today, machines take most of the decision, right? Your ticketing information, how much credit you should be given, how much personal loan you should be given, even what kind of movie ticket you should get. So a lot of that stuff is being now done by machines. And so with decisions being taken over by machines, people are taking a step back. So most decisions are either completely being taken by a machine or being assisted by a machine. And what that meant was as we all know, machines don't require reports. They don't require printed things on a piece of paper. They need a stream of data. They need crunchable, structured data to be able to make those decisions. And so that's when I got into the data asset space, because there are a lot of our clients in the US, in Europe, in India, who wanted to create high quality data assets so that then their machines could make the decisions that they wanted to. And these have become very valuable over time. And then when BMR got acquired by KPMG, I kind of went to KPMG and I worked there for a couple of years. And the same trend happened there. We saw the same thing happen in banking. We saw the same thing happening in insurance. We saw the same thing happening in e-commerce. I used to lead a lot of work for anti-money laundering and risk. And their AML compliance, which is a big deal globally, is primarily run on high quality data. Your KYC, checking whether you're on some sanctions list, checking whether you're a terrorist or not, checking whether you're the right kind of person to do business with or not. All of that is data driven. And so with this entire evolution, I started off as a banker who saw bankers getting frustrated by lack of data. And finally, I kind of ended at KPMG just before this, where I saw companies just hungry for high quality data and willing to put good money to be able to invest in those. And I think that's really where the evolution has happened.
So, given your career trajectory over these past years, would you say that data assets can be limitedly applied to the financial sector or the BFSI sector or the e-commerce space for that matter? Or do you think data assets can essentially be implemented all across sectors and all across industries?
Theoretically, they can be applied anywhere, but I think there are a couple of things that we look at when we look at the applicability or the economics of application of a data asset. So one is we look at the economic value of a decision being taken. So what that means is, if the decision I'm taking is of very high economic value, like a mergers and acquisition, then usually people end up still being part of that process, right? But if the economic value of the decision is very low, so that it is no longer viable for a person to take that decision on a repeated manner, that's where data assets play a big role and machines play a big role. One is that. Second is the frequency of that decision being taken. If a certain decision is only going to be taken once a year, you're not going to build a data asset or a data model or a machine learning model to be able to take that decision, because it doesn't make sense. But if you have to take decisions at the rate of hundreds and thousands of millions, like in the case of transactions or in the case of credit, then you would need to apply data assets and algorithms and machine learning. And these guys kind of go hand in hand. So I think those are the two things that we look at in terms of the economic value of the decision and the frequency of that decision. And the third is that we look at is the current ecosystem of technology around that decision, right? Are there machines already available? Are there machine learning models already available? Is it even an advanced stage? For example, maybe this may not work very well in the cement manufacturing industry because there aren't too many technologies in the digital space in that area, right? So you really can't apply digital assets there. And the last thing that we look at is regulatory requirements. So the more regulatory driven a space is, the more the dependency on high quality data. And that's really what we look at. So these are the four things that we look at. To answer your first question on what are the sectors, as of right now, there are three sectors that we can clearly see where data assets are applied across the board. The first one is BFSI, financial services. The second one is pharma and medical. And the third one is energy. And if you really think about it, all three of these sectors have those qualities, those four qualities that I spoke about, right? The economic amount, the economic value of the decision being taken, the frequency of the decision being taken, the regulatory push, they're very regulatory driven, and finally the technology is available. So I think these three areas are quite big, but we can see many more areas sort of come into this fold over the next decade or so.
Very interesting. So, when you mention these three sectors, pharma, energy, and BFSI, even across these three sectors, there are companies and organizations across various scales. A company could be an MSME, it could be an MNC, and it could have various levels of technological implementation or technological integration at various levels too, vertically or horizontally. Now, do you think that it is necessary for you to sort of classify them and then assess the criticality with which data asset management is needed in these companies? And how do you classify them in the first place? And how important is it for these companies to have this sort of a technological integration if they are in this sector?
So I think the rule of thumb: the larger the organization, the more the capability, the need, and the desire for data assets in general is what we've seen. Right? There are a couple of exceptions, of course. Some of them being, maybe the public sector unit banks, or some of the public, or some of the larger old school organizations. But in general, if you are a large, global, sprawling organization, the dependency on data assets is definitely something that we will see, simply because life becomes just so much more easier, and it's also very cost effective on the medium to long term. So that's one. The second thing that we kind of look at them is based on the culture that they have, right? So culture plays a big part of, a big role in the entire space of digital transformation. And as you're moving from having low dependency or no dependency in data assets to high dependency on data assets, it is definitely a digital transformation exercise that needs to be carried out within the organization, in general. And so the cultural need and the cultural driver to want that and have that becomes a big thing. And what we've seen is organizations who are looking at growing at a certain pace, organizations who have aspirations to be global, and organizations who have aspirations to be more invested in R&D in the future will have that culture, as the overarching kind of theme in that place. So that's two. The third is, we definitely look at, what is the amount of, what are the other drivers. So, for example, if you are backed by an institutional investor, if you're backed by a venture capital firm, or if you've just had an IPO, you look at much of that money being raised from the point of view of developing assets or deployment in investments. And data asset and the infrastructure around it is intrinsically an investment, right? So those are the three things that we look at. Those are the three categorizations we do. In terms of size, I'd say if you're an MSME, if you're a micro or a medium organization, not really medium, but if you're a small organization, many organizations may not have the wherewithal to kind of go, dive into this head first. They may take some time, they may raise some money, or they may create their own small data assets for them to grow. But our clients, and where we've seen successes, if you're a small organization, if you're, even if you're, we've had clients who have been two people companies or one person companies in the US who've raised millions of dollars on the back of the data assets and products that we've created for them. So you can be micro or you can be small, but you need to have the capacity and the ambition to be able to raise money, to be able to make that product, to be able to make that data asset as the core of your organization.
Very interesting. So, when you mention the aspect of aspirations to go global, and this could be one of those things that perhaps you as an entrepreneur, A, capitalized on, right? And B, aside from the fact that you mentioned that there is a lack of good data or lack of great, valuable data, what other key challenges did you notice or did you identify that led you to establish Zygram in the first place for these kind of companies, and to sort of add more value to the business that they were doing? And more importantly, what was your thought process setting up a business despite your career in these big organizations previously, and when you started off as somebody who's been into hotel management, and what was the transition like?
Sure. So my hotel management to begin with, happened just like I think it happens for most 18-year-olds or 19-year-olds who are getting out of school by accident, right? Because very few of us, or at least I was absolutely unclear about what I was going to do in life, and I was generally an okay student. I was actually all right, and my father walks in one day when I think I was lying down on the bed or something, and he says, "Hey, fill this form up." And I didn't really ask him why, and I kind of filled the form up and gave the exam, and I did all right. So I got into hotel management. Those 2 3 years in hotel management were great, but it also, what is most amazing about the experience was that it opened up the eyes of an otherwise coddled middle class boy who's lived a very well made, well constructed life around himself, and I was kind of exposed to, for lack of a better word, money for the first time in my life, because my father was in the army. We moved around across the world, across not the world, but in India. And while that's a great setup, you don't get the exposure to civilian life. You don't get the exposure to industry. You don't get the exposure to what's happening really, on ground. And so I got that exposure, and that was great. I worked for a couple of years actually in the hotel. So I worked in Chennai, I worked in Calcutta, and those were amazing exposures because you could see, and this I'm talking about 2006 to 2008, that India was really booming at that point in time. I mean, the kind of heady optimism that I saw in 2006, 2007, you could literally poke it with a fork in the middle of the air, and you could poke that optimism in the middle of the air. That was how thick and heavy it was. And then 2008 came in, the crash came in. We didn't really feel the crash so much in the US that happened. I mean, most people think of it as a seminal time in India, but really most people didn't feel it that much. And I decided to just go out and do my MBA. I did my MBA. Those 2 years in my MBA were very good. I did a lot of work. I kind of worked on a lot of projects. And that gave me more understanding of the VC space, of the data space, of the consulting space, of many of the things that you otherwise don't get. And as I kind of went through this journey, like I spoke about, from Axis Bank to Dun and Bradstreet to BMR to KPMG, I think one thing that became very clear is that in India we have a couple of great advantages, right? We are inherently, as for lack of a better word, a civilization. Our minds are oriented towards the academic, towards taking up things that are somewhat esoteric and putting them in our heads and visualizing them. As a civilization, we are very good at visualizing stuff, right? So data actually comes naturally to us because of our background in science, our background in mathematics, our background in technology. It's far more pervasive, and so that's what has actually allowed us in India, and not many people know this. Most Indians or most folks globally who are data scientists or in the data asset space or in the statistics space or mathematics space actually come from India, China, and then Russia, right? So these are the three people who kind of have taken over the space. Now, when I was in KPMG and before that in BMR Advisors, what I realized was the data asset space required a multidisciplinary approach, right? You cannot just build a technology company and say, all right, now I'm going to work on data, because there are so many other aspects to it. And with that in mind, I think it became clear to me that I always wanted to do something of my own. I've never had it. I'm not I don't think I was sharp enough to come up with a great, credible idea just out of college. So I kind of took 10, 11, 12 years to, figure out if what I wanted to do while I was working. And I realized that data assets is a space that I understand uniquely. I worked in it for about 10 odd years. And a multidisciplinary approach has not really been taken by anyone that I knew of globally, not just in India, but globally. And the right place to set it up was outside of, great institutions like KPMG. May not be the best place for trying out some of these ideas, which can fail, right? But you need people from engineering, you need people from data science, you need people from research, you need people from solutions, you need people from a varied set of backgrounds for it to happen. And so that's when I decided to kind of, take a little bit of a leap. I was fortunate enough to get a few of the folks who've worked with me for many, many years to also, put their faith in me, take this decision of leaving KPMG for, a 3-person, 4-person operation in sometime in 2018. And I think to some extent that's kind of paid off.
Awesome. So, if you were to sort of dive more into how Zygram is doing as of now, and what were the long term goals which you set out with, have they changed over the years? So, if you could just shed some light on that, that'd be great.
Sure. So, goals for me, in my limited experience, definitely change because realities change. And more importantly, new opportunities open up, and old opportunities that you're kind of, aiming for, they don't look that great anymore in a couple of years. Opportunities, somebody once told me are a little bit like stars, right? So many of the stars that you're seeing right now in the sky are millions of light years away. They've probably already exploded. They've already gone. They're already dust. But you look at them as stars and you look at them as aspirations. And people, smart people, ambitious people, people who set up great businesses, they realize that in most cases one has to be able to identify a trend or a wave before it has started or just at the beginning of that wave to take great advantage of it. And so our goals have also changed. As an overarching theme, we are absolutely clear. We want to be the best data asset company in the world. And and we are absolutely dead set certain on that overarching theme of our approach. That really is a goal. We see data assets as being relevant, as being powerful, as being something that is going to create long-term value, at least for the next couple of decades. And we want to be the best in the world at that. Now that's the goal really that there is. But in terms of how we've changed, I think we started with 4 people, like I mentioned, and today we are about 105. We'll probably hit 200 sometime next year. We have grown quite significantly, multiples each year. More importantly, at present we are completely self-funded. So we've not raised any money, we've not raised any funds. We've been able to. We are very fortunate that clients have reposed their faith in us, and people, customers have forced their, kind of put their faith in us for us to be able to grow organically. And so that's really where we are. So we today have a very healthy mix of researchers, of consultants, or rather consultants who come in from organizations like the Big Four and come here and become solutions experts or become managers and become project leads. We have a couple of products which are in the pipeline. We have 2 products that have already been released, and we most of our clients are based out of the US and primarily out of the US, right? So I think in that sense we've met with that success over the last in just over about 2 years right now.
I think that's wonderful, and that's almost a picture perfect story which you've just narrated to me right now. But coming to a more from a learning curve aspect, and over the journey which you've had over the years, let's say establishing a team, identifying your niche, your space, and sort of disrupting that. I'm sure there comes a steep learning curve with it as well, considering you changed lanes and you switched careers and everything. But at the end of the day, if you were to sort of, let's say, tell me who out of your customer base or yourself had the bigger learning curve out of this? Was it you as an organization or as a founder who is trying to percolate the idea of data assets and their importance? or was it the consumer base or your customer base that you were targeting, that how important is data asset management to their company, and what is the long term value which these data assets can bring to them?
Sure. So I'm of the opinion that in any great relationship, whether it's a B2B relationship or whether it's a personal relationship, a great relationship is almost always defined by, a give and take of learning, of experiences, of enriching both the entities that are involved. And this is also very true for our experience, where we have learned a lot from our clients, right? Because our clients will come in from a different set of spaces. So one client is, a very large data company. The other one is a company that's focused in the marijuana and cannabis space in the US. The third one is in the legal tech space. Someone else is in the consulting space. One of them is a big four organization. So when you look at those, you get really great perspectives from all these type of organizations, and I think that's something that we really look forward to, because it just it takes us to a very different level as a young organization. The ability to have the kind of depth and exposure to so many clients, and we really look forward to it. I think where we definitely add value is that we are absolutely clear that there are very few people in the world who know data assets the way that we do, the way that Zygram does, right? And so when it comes to handholding, to some extent educating and collaborating with our customers and with our clients, from the perspective of data assets and the associated technologies of data science, engineering, platform development, application development, research, KYC, anti-money laundering compliance, PEPs, we probably end up offering a lot more in these interactions, and we are able to elevate the understanding of our clients and the stakeholders in those quite naturally. So in a sense, we do a lot of give and take in these relationships, where we get a lot of knowledge about their industries, their areas, their focus areas, their what's happening in those spaces, so that we are able to enrich and enable our teams better. We're able to become far better professionals, far better company. But we definitely add a lot of value when it comes to education, and in most cases, that is what is required. Because when you kind of talk to Zygram and you talk to us, you are absolutely aware that in most cases, data assets is a new space for you, and therefore the technologies, the ecosystem, the requirements, all of that is going to be something that is new, and we want to make sure that we are able to offer that support and that knowledge to our customers and our clients.
So, when you say that you know data assets like nobody else does, so would you say that this has proved to be a great first mover advantage? Number one, and more importantly, when you mention that, and that's an interesting take back from your previous answer, that when you say that there is a consulting company and there's a big four organization, etc., who you've dealt with and who've been your clients, there is a high level of human dependency in these kind of firms, especially consultancy businesses for that matter. So, how do data assets come into the picture where there is a lot of human stakeholders involved? And are there ways in which Zygram or companies similar to yours have been adding value in this particular aspect, like you mentioned?
I would say is that when we look at these organizations like the big four organizations or the big three consulting firms, in my opinion, what they've mastered is they have mastered institutionally the art of solving business problems, right? And that's something which most people don't think about. Most people kind of underplay in today's date, but they've mastered the art of doing that. And when we work with them as partners, as providers, we realize that here is a set of people who have spent decades and decades in terms of partners, in terms of the directors that are there, in terms of the whole set of human intelligence that they've kind of gathered, and they are there to solve business problems for their clients. Now, if you think about the role that Zygram plays the role of solving a type of problem in the three sectors that I mentioned: BFSI, pharma and healthcare, and energy, and a couple of others that are emerging, but also for specific use cases. So what we end up doing is we end up working with the big four companies, or the consulting company, to be able to take data assets as a part of the solution to their end clients. And there, what happens is that while, say, for example, if it's a anti-money laundering compliance program, now large banks have been fined in the last 20 years, have been fined, over $60 billion in total because of lack of compliance in anti-money laundering. So the big four institutions have been at the forefront, along with many other technology companies, in solving those and setting up those programs, making sure basically that after 9/11, we don't have another incidents of terrorism which is funded through banking channels. And so that's where a lot of the focus is. Now, when you think about that, there are so many moving parts in anti-money laundering, and I've been part of global engagements there in the in the past as well, where we've set up these programs for them. When you have to do that, you are looking at building policies, you're looking at building solutions, you're looking at building a structure, hierarchy, training, and data assets is one component of that entire solution. Now, the big four are great at solving problems, but when it comes to data assets, many of them choose to come to us because then we are able to, because we're specialists in that. Just like you would, you would go to say a laptop vendor, or just like you would go to, an insurance vendor, or just like you would go to someone else to be able to fit these pieces into a puzzle. And I think that's how we work with them. We are one part of the puzzle that the big four organizations kind of take with them to be able to solve it for their clients.
So it's interesting that you've managed to find this sort of a niche service provision or this sort of product provision to help these kind of organizations. And was it the plan at first to let's say have one offering and then diversify as you go forward, or did you all start off with a catalog of services and then narrowed it down?
Well, of course, we always had a plan, but like the great saying goes, everybody has a plan till they get hit in the face. And so, just like with every other, every startup or any organization, we've taken our hits in the face every now and then. And so we've had to change that plan. But really, what we were able to do is we had a couple of core competencies beyond, which are in terms of the areas that we worked in. So we work extensively in, like I said, banking and financial services, which includes a hyper focus on anti-money laundering, risk, compliance, due diligence. So what we did was we kind of went out and built data assets for those use cases. A, because it allowed us to have that context in place, to have that business context in place, right? As you may know, a lot of startups with great founders, fantastic people, great capabilities, often don't end up seeing the kind of success that they want to, because they're not able to solve a credible problem, or they don't have enough context about a credible problem, so they're not able to apply their capabilities to that problem. We didn't want to kind of fall into that trap. We were very aware of that, so we played to our strengths in the beginning, and we said, and we continue to play to those strengths, which is we're going to build data assets and we're going to focus on risk, compliance, banking, financial services, KYC, due diligence, those areas, which are very, very data heavy. And so we started off with that, and we built products on that. We built this thing on that. We also had clients who, for example, PEPs, politically exposed persons, is a big space in the AML kind of ecosystem. And so we worked there. We were able to release a product. We were able to get a big client in there. And so with that kind of approach, we were able to establish at least a baseline of success and a baseline of business activity, which has now allowed us to kind of look into legal tech. It's allowed us to look into pharma. It's allowed us to look into energy. It's allowed us to do a couple of really fascinating things. That has been the approach that we've taken till now. But I have no doubt that as the world changes, which it almost always does, we'll have to modify and tweak this.
So, speaking of modifications and speaking how the world has changed, if we straight up come to the point of COVID-19, which has been pretty much a world changing event on its own, not just from the perspective of businesses, but from the perspective of understanding the very core value of human life. I think COVID-19 has shed light on a lot of factors for companies and businesses and economies which weren't essentially caught by the eye before. Now, do you think it has had this sort of an impact on the data asset space as well? Or do you think there's a pattern as to how things will be in a pre COVID, post COVID world? Or if I were to, let's say, put the current terms into context, will there be a change in a pre vaccine versus post vaccine scenario?
I think I would not have the ability to foresee at this point of time on what a post vaccine world will look like, simply because one has to see what the mass impact of these vaccines are and how do they get rolled out. The actual execution of the rollout of the vaccine is going to take some time. So, with that in mind, I don't see personally the vaccine impact kind of trickling down on an on-ground basis, that is, impacting real world health and so on and so forth, till the end of 2021. That's my educated guess. But definitely the world has changed pre and post COVID. That is for sure. Some things that we thought will massively change, I don't think will change that much. And I remember, just like many other people, getting on a call with friends, with business colleagues, with others, and kind of discussing ad nauseum what the changes in the world were going to be. In fact, I wrote like a small article about it. And we were all trying to play soothsayers at that point of time. Some of those things have kind of predictably come true. Most have not. But what has happened post COVID is that the world has definitely increased the reliance on digitization and data. Right, that reliance has gone up. So when I say digital, whether it's digital payments, whether it's digital shopping, whether it's kind of accessing content online, that has definitely happened, and that's not. I don't think that's going to taper off. In fact, that's just the catalyst that those areas were primed for. Data is exactly the same. You now need to make decisions with a high degree of confidence because there is not too much of a margin of failure. There are hedge funds out there are banks out there who've made a lot of money because they had access to what we call alternative data, which means data of satellites, heat signatures, job listings, traffic movement, to be able to predict when certain economies will open up, when certain economies will shut down, when kind of companies will do it. And they've actually used that to become quite wealthy over this time. So when you look at that, there's a whole host of banks and funds and organizations who are now looking at consuming data by the boatloads because they see real tangible value, economic value in that. And so that's kind of taken a big uptick. A good example is, satellite imagery. Satellite imagery was a steadily growing space and has absolutely boomed in the post-COVID times. Why? Because people can't travel anymore. So if you've got an oil rig somewhere, if you've got a factory somewhere, if you've got a shop somewhere, how else will you be able to know what the condition of that asset is? Except for satellites, and satellites have gotten cheaper over time. So data consumption has grown up, data dependency has grown up, data acceptability has grown up, digitization has definitely taken a big jump up, and digital transformation is where I definitely see investments going in right now. And with that, naturally, the space is going to kind of go up. So anybody who's in this ecosystem, in the general ecosystem, is probably going to see better days unless and until something new happens. That is, at least is how I see things moving right now.
It's interesting that you mention the dependency on data and digital transformation because a lot of companies owe to the kind of remote working that they've been forced to adapt into and they've been forced to adopt as a practice is something that they've been undertaking a lot right now. Be it integrating cloud software or be it integrating any form of remote co-working facilities, digital transformation has been a big buzzword or something which has caught a lot of eye these days, right? So, how would you say that the role of data assets is in this digital transformation aspect? And how do you see its significance increasing over time?
Digital transformation really means that you're moving to a more digital dependent decision making backbone for your organization. It means ERPs, it means decision systems, it means MISs, it means dashboards, it means automation, it means all of that, right? That's really what it is. And so, if the number of machines per decision increase, if the for efficiency, for better capabilities, for more resilience, for high quality decisions, the amount of data that will get consumed will and which will get generated and which will get consumed is going to grow up accordingly. In fact, it's going to grow up exponentially because each machine will end up consuming an exponential amount of data over time as processing power increases. So when digital transformation happens, a company is saying, you know what, the old way of doing things, which was more manual, more people dependent, more human intervention dependent, has to change, and we have to become more digitally enabled. And in most cases, that what that means is ERPs. And if anybody's dealt with ERPs, and ERPs is a fascinating topic in its own. The amount of data consumed, generated, and processed is just mind blowing. But more importantly, what that would mean is that the data that is going into the systems cannot be low quality. It has to be high quality, otherwise, business decisions don't get made very well. And so there is investment money and a culture which is getting developed, which says we want high quality data. Otherwise, the digital transformation that we've kind of put in place is not going to be as successful as it otherwise would be.
Interesting. So we can definitely see data assets becoming a really important cog in the wheel as to how the world becomes a lot more digital. And if I were to sort of close the podcast on this very note, what would be your final closing remarks about the space, about the industry, about the importance of data assets and how it's going to become a lot more digital in the next years and in the next decades? And if you were to, let's say, give a small message to the aspiring entrepreneurs who are looking to enter the data asset space, what would that be?
I see the data asset space growing really fast into something very, very credible. It is already quite credible, but into something very substantial in the next 5 to 6 years. A great point there being, the recent acquisition of IHS Market by I think S&P Global, which happened at I think a $44 billion value. And those are effectively two data companies that are getting merged, or one is buying the other. There have been multi-billion-dollar consolidations happening in the space, and the reason for that is because large organizations across the world understand that data assets and those who control data, those who control high quality data, are going to have a huge competitive advantage going forward. So I definitely see this space growing. I see the space growing in many, many new areas, apart from just the 2, 3 sectors that I mentioned. We will see it becoming pervasive across the board. So I'm actually quite excited. I'm hugely kicked about the space and the capabilities and the expectations that people have of us as far as the data asset space is concerned. Now, for I think anybody who's looking at getting into this space or into an allied space, I'd say one is definitely have your basics in place. So the basics are a deep understanding, credible understanding of data, a credible understanding of data science, a credible understanding of technologies and how they apply, how to build applications. Because without these building blocks in place and the right kind of talent, it becomes quite difficult to kind of proceed going further. That's one. Two is to begin with, just I suppose in the same way that I have done or that we've done at Zigram, pick an area of comfort, an area of expertise, a sector of expertise where you want to build data assets in. That's two. And third is execute, 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 because data is one of those places where after a great evening or during a great evening, everybody can have a huge multiple of ideas. Everybody got great ideas in this space, but the guys who are going to do well, and the ones that at least I have seen from the limited time that I've spent here doing extremely well in the data space, are the ones who can just execute extremely well. And so those will be my sort of 3 small pieces of advice.
Awesome. And on that wonderful note, I would like to conclude this podcast and thank you for joining me on this episode of Out of the Pod. It has been an absolute pleasure to host you, Abhishek.
Thanks, Saib, and I hope you have a great year ahead, 2021.
Thank you so much. It has been absolutely wonderful to have this discussion. I'm sure our listeners have a lot of takeaways from this, and there is a lot more value which they'll understand that how data assets play an important role in the organizations of the future. Once again, thank you for joining me on this podcast. As for the listeners who are listening to this episode, you know what to do. Like, share, and subscribe is the usual drill. Check out all our other episodes of Out of the Pod and our other podcast series, Everything Business, on thebrief.co.in. This is your host, Sahib Singh, signing off.